Hi, I'm Michelle Clary. I'm going to be presenting on EDL 850's Module 12, the case study, Copyright in the Computer, Regulations Governing Technology. In the presentation of the case study copyright law, we're going to be talking about the problem, the strategy proposal, and implementing the next steps. In the case, it takes place at St. Regis Elementary School. It's a kindergarten through 8th grade building with 420 students. The people who are involved are Mr. Sample, the principal, Mrs. Lynn, the library media specialist and computer laboratory teacher, Mrs. Brandon, the 3rd grade teacher. What has happened is multiple copies of a commercially produced computer programs are being distributed to 3 different grade levels, 6 different classrooms. The school district has only paid for 1 license on 4 different programs. We are in violation of the copyright law because we've gone a little crazy distributing our resources to all of the teachers. Mrs. Lynn, the library media specialist, doesn't see what is the problem, and she thinks that she's doing a good thing because she's helping the school district save money. Mrs. Brandon wants nothing to do with this technology because she knows that it's in violation of the copyright law. And then there sits the principal with a new dilemma on his hands. The legal issue at hand is the copyright and fair use guidelines for teachers. So with the copyright law, schools are allowed to purchase licensed software. And if you're a library, you'll be able to lend the software to patrons. Software can be installed on multiple machines and distributed via a network. One machine at a time may use the computer program, and the number of license may not exceed the number of machines that it's being used for. A network license may be required for multiple users. To summarize what I think Mr. Sample needs to do is, I think he needs to take an aggressive action to monitor that illegal copying is not taking place in his school with the computer programs that were only purchased for a single license use. The timeline of the facts. So this takes place in about a 9-week period of school. It all goes back 3 years ago when we began fundraising to purchase 20 computer labs, 20 computers to form 1 lab, and 1 computer for each classrooms. Each year, the teachers get to prioritize the computer programs that they would like to use within their classrooms that enhance the curriculum. Mrs. Brandon and the other 3rd grade teacher each selected 2 programs each that they could use with the funds that they had raised. And obviously they picked really good programs because the other teachers in 1st, 2nd, grade went to the librarian, Mrs. Lynn, and said, "Can you copy those computer programs so I can use them in my classroom with my students in my curriculum?" Mrs. Lynn happily complied to this request, and within a week, the flash drives were being distributed to 3 different grade levels. Mrs. Brandon was the only teacher that refused the flash drive with the computer programs on it because she knew that the programs were only for 1 user each, and she knew it was in violation of the copyright law. But Mrs. Lynn, the librarian, became very upset that she didn't accept the flash drive and thought that she wasn't following the best policy that she was putting forward for all the teachers to follow. Mrs. Brandon was so disturbed about violation of the copyright law, she notified the principal of what was taking place. The next day, the principal went to question the librarian about the copying of the computer programs, and her story paralleled what Mrs. Brandon had notified him. Mrs. Lynn went on to say that the school board member volunteered in the library last week and even helped copy the computer programs onto the flash drive, and she had thanked Mrs. Lynn and appreciated her for being so conscientious of the school district's budget. Big dilemma is a lot of people know very little about the copyright law and their responsibility as an education in a school to be following these copyright laws. So to prioritize the information for the principal when he needs to when he's balancing out his option is he needs to consider the relationships that he has built with his staff, the relationships between the teachers and the media specialists, new hires versus veteran teachers. And we also need to consider the PTA and the community of the fundraising, and if because they expect a school to use the funds appropriately. If we're in violation of copyright law, we have mistrust of using our funds. We also need to take notice that our staff has limited understanding of how the copyright affects them at school. And we also need to get rid of the notion that just because we're a small town school district doesn't mean we're null and void of not complying with the copyright law. So the principal, Mr. Sample, he's got options. The first option is he could do nothing. He could just let those flash drives be in those classrooms and kids could use the computer programs, and he could wait and see if the school district ever gets notified if we violated the copyright law. Option 2, which I prefer that he use, is he could put a pause on using the computer programs on the flash drives. He could go to the librarian and say, I need you to collect those flash drives until we find out some more information. We need to identify how many users can be using these computer programs. And then we need to look in to see if the computer programs can be distributed through the district's network. So we're avoiding the copyright infringement. Oops, skipped a little page there. Some strategies that he can do along with the dilemma is he can provide professional development about the district's policies and establish parameters of the use of the technology and the computer software. He would need to start with that with the librarian first, but then he needs to extend it to staff members and also inviting the community, the PTA, and have evening time slots where the review of the copyright law and district policies can be reviewed. We also need to review and implement the Internet Technology Acceptable Use policies, and we need to include the parents in reviewing the AUP. We need to put that policy on the district and school websites within the newsletters. We need to continue with prioritizing the software that's needed for each grade level. We need to determine the cost of a network license so we can have more than one person using that computer program. And we need to evaluate the current programs we have with the district and make sure that we are within the copyright law when we are using those. We can develop a committee to search for grants and scholarships and free programs that the school can use. We can develop a plan for technology maintenance. We can implement the internet use policy and monitor compliance for all district employees, students, and parents. And we also need to think about rewriting the library media specialist's job if she is going to be including the duties of the computer lab teacher. And we need to make sure that she's upholding the copyright laws with technology distribution and acquiring and maintaining technology. So when evaluating the options, I already alluded to some pros and some cons. Some of the pros of option number 2, is it follows the law. It has the principal be a leader who will uphold the law. Option 2, also, I believe that it's able to salvage the relationships between the co-workers and the community members, because we're identifying that we did this incorrectly, but here's our steps to do our corrective action to make sure that we're doing it right the next time. We're also on option 2, establishing policies and procedures for the district that affects all staff and students. Option 2 also defines a plan and implements the internet use and monitors compliance. And option 2 also updates the media center specialist job description. Some cons of the options are: option 1 doesn't support a copyright law. Option 1 doesn't promote positive staff relationship. And then option 2 doesn't support the old school veteran way of thinking of we're doing it this way just because I've been here for 25 years. So the best option is option 2. Some of the things Mr. Sample needs to do is he needs to locate the district's internet use policy, and have it in hand when he goes to talk to Mrs. Lynn about the next steps that need to take place. It can be the third point piece of data in explaining why we're doing it this way. We need to plan out the next steps of communicating with staff of the corrective action that needs to take place with the collection of the pirated programs, because we're not going to use them until we are fully licensed. Implementing option number 2. You need to start with the superintendent, district lawyer, and any of the State Department committees that are there to help support school districts. We need to develop a plan of action for the AUP and an acquisition of funds needed for technology updates. We need to update the job description of the media specialist, or we need to create a new job description for the roles of a computer lab monitor. We need to establish whose role it will be to monitor compliance and acquire the equipment and maintenance of the technology. Propose the updates at a school board meeting for their approval so they are informed of the policy and the action to implement. After the school board approves it, you notify staff and parents in newsletter, email, and district websites about the district's internet use policy and copyright law. And you need to make sure that annually that there's professional development given to the teachers about complying with the copyright law. And then we need to launch an annual plan of action of how the AUP will be shared and collected from parents, for staff, and students. That's the steps I would take. These are the references that I used in implementing my option 2 of the case study. This is my reflection that I had on the case study. I think that one of the biggest pieces in this case study is relationships. And I think the thing that will establish relationships the most is the tone of voice that you use when you talk with the librarian. Another thing that I have to use as a leader is I have to make sure that I've fixed my face, that I'm not rolling my eyes or making funny things, because I have a history of doing this ever since I was 5 is what I got in trouble for the most. The other thing I need to correct is my volume and my tone of voice is when I'm giving and receiving feedbacks. So I think the tone of voice and facial expressions is what's going to help salvage those relationships in your positive relationship that the principal has with the librarian, and how the librarian and the third teacher can coexist with each other, and how we can coexist with the families within our community. I think once we take a deep breath and we see that there's a problem, and we make a plan of how we're going to correct the problem and how we're going to move forward, I think everyone will be on board with that. And then along the way, if a discussion needs to happen of how we can do this better, I would most certainly welcome those opportunities with the people within my school. Anything that we can do that make learning easier and more fun for kids, to get them actively engaged within our schools and learning, is going to be the best policy, and it's going to make the better community that we live in. So thank you for listening to my presentation on Module 12. I look forward to working with you in the future.